Our next lesson is using abbreviations and acronyms in our writing. What is an abbreviation anyway? So abbreviations actually are everywhere, from common titles like doctor and professor to the abbreviations that you see on street signs like street or road or heights. So specifically, what these abbreviations are shorter versions or shorter spellings of words and expressions that we use all the time. So for example, in our picture, we have presenting Mr. and Mrs. Thor the Barbarian. Notice that Mr. is abbreviated, which means shortened, for the word Mr. spelled M-I-S-T-E-R. Mrs. is actually just an abbreviation for the word Mrs. That would be, I think it's M-I-S-S-U-S for Mrs., a word that we would rarely ever spell out in the actual letters. So do you remember contractions were like shortened versions of two words put together? Well, this is a shortened version of one word. Let's look at some specific examples of these shortened words. Now, what we find as we look at them is that the abbreviations are usually formed using the most recognizable letters from the word. So for Mr., the M and the R are used. So when you think about phonetic learning and spelling, when you sound out the word Mr., the M and the R are fairly prominent letters when you're sounding it out. So those are the ones that whoever created abbreviations and created this one chose those two words or those two letters as the most significant. We also have, for example, boulevard, which is BLVD, period. We have corporation. Corporation is shortened using the first four letters. Miles per hour is actually a shortening of a phrase. So we can also shorten phrases, or like the next example, place names. New York becomes NY. So we should be able to recognize an abbreviation. How do we pronounce an abbreviation? So most of the time, they're pronounced the same way as the original word. So whether you're reading it out loud or in your head. So for example, Professor Snape would be pronounced Professor Snape, not Prof Snape. We have etc., etc. You would say that as etc., not etc. So that's something sometimes you have to get your head around, but usually when you are speaking, you would say, you know, I live on Winjow Drive, not Winjow DR or Winjow Der. If you're talking about Dr. Oz, you're going to say Dr. Oz, not Der Oz. So it wouldn't be an English class if I didn't have an exception to a rule or some odd thing for you to think about and consider. And here is this one that goes along with our abbreviations. And it is the argument about using a period versus not using a period. So in American English, and typically Canadian follows American rules for most things, there is a period after an abbreviation. So it doesn't matter if the abbreviation is the first two letters of the word or the first and last letter of the word, there is always a period after the last letter. For British writers, the abbreviations that are written with the first and last letter of the word do not get a period. So different from our American, Canadian English, the British do not use the period. Another situation to think about is if you have an abbreviation made up of all capital letters. So USA stands for United States of America. Typically, when you're writing an abbreviation that has 3 capital letters, you do not put periods in between each letter. But abbreviations made up of lower letters tend to have them. So when you're talking about time, like 3 p.m., if you're using capital letters for p.m., you do not need periods in between. If you're using lowercase for your P and your M, you do need periods in between. Similar to abbreviations, but not quite the same, are words called acronyms. Acronym is a stand-in for a string of words, usually an organization name, a slogan, or something else that's long and wordy. So, unlike abbreviations, they're not shorter spellings of words, they're just made up of the word's initials. Let's look at the little cartoon there. This guy says, I'm thinking of joining the CIA. Anybody know what CIA stands for? Central Intelligence Agency. And that dear hippo is saying LOL, which often means laugh out loud. So this is an example of 2 acronyms. It's just shortening up a wordy phrase or maybe longer than required or longer than wanted word. So it's a kind of like a shortcut for people, both in speaking and also it can be in writing. So they're almost always made up of the word's initials and they're spelled in all caps. So here's some examples here, organizations, mnemonics, sandwiches, lots of different acronyms. United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund is called UNICEF. This is a really interesting example here. It's the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and it is NAACP as its acronym. But the really cool thing is, we don't say NAACP. We say NAACP. So it's another interesting way that we have adopted and adapted the language. I've not ever heard of this before I started watching a Netflix series, Scandal, POTUS. I was like, what is POTUS? Well, it is President of the United States. POTUS. There's one here for an order of operations, something we may have learned in junior high. PEDMAS, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. It means parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction. And it is an acronym for the order of operations in a math problem. We all would like to be considered VIP from time to time, which means very important person. Bed and breakfast, we have B&B, and interesting in this example, our little and symbol arises. So it's not BAB, it's B with an and symbol, B. And then lastly, we have bacon, lettuce, and tomato. So that's ideally a sandwich, a BLT. So these are some neat acronyms for some things we, come across in our daily lives. And sometimes, like my example with POTUS, we might know what the acronym is and say it, but we have no idea what it actually means. And this happens actually with a lot of organizational names. Like I have a council that I sit on or a group and it's a rook. Well, I know it's a rook, but I'm not 100% sure all the time what those letters actually mean when I say the entire name. Another one that in the college world is something called an Aero tour. Are you going on the Aero tour? I sure am, but I really don't know what Aero stands for, but I know I'm going to be there. So it's interesting, like with conferences, organizations, things like that have their own acronyms, and often the acronyms are more readily used and, of course, easier to remember than the full name of what they're talking about. So again, how do we pronounce these acronyms? Acronyms are read differently from abbreviations. So, for example, BLT. If you saw that on the menu at your favorite restaurant, you'd say, I want a BLT. You probably wouldn't say, I want a bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich. And you probably wouldn't say, I want a Bolt. You would say, I want a BLT. So that's what kind of makes these acronyms unique. You can read them as they appear, even though they stand for something else. And you can read them as individual letters, like BLT. You can read them as individual letters like ASAP, which stands for as soon as possible, or sometimes you can read it as ASAP. You can blend the words together to create, or blend the letters to create a word. ASAP also means as soon as possible. So acronyms are a little different, and depending on, I guess, societal expectations and how society pronounces them, that's how you should do it too. And if you're not sure, you can certainly ask somebody, or you can look up pronunciations of acronyms and see what the Google tells us we should do. If this is your first introduction to abbreviations and acronyms, you may feel like we're speaking a whole new language here. Well, when it comes to social media, we are often speaking a whole new language. So social media, including Twitter, texting, Snapchat, TikTok, these platforms have greatly increased the use of abbreviations and acronyms. So both the old ones that we're familiar with or may have been around for a while, and new ones. So what you'll notice is that it's also called text speak. It's like where we abbreviate almost every word, and it's not really for style, although a little bit. It's more for like faster speed of texting. It could be due to a little bit of laziness, people not wanting to type out an entire word, but it's a new language and it's text speak, and really there's a time and a place. So if you're doing business correspondence, email, texting, abbreviations and acronyms and text speak may not be the best use of your, I guess, language skills. Please be aware of your audience in the situation, as well as the knowledge they would have about the acronyms and abbreviations you're choosing to use, and determine if that's appropriate or not. What I did do here is I included a few links, and I will pop them in our additional resources section. We have an always up-to-date list of social media abbreviations that includes business-related terms. I have a NetLingo dictionary with every texting acronym and online abbreviation you'll ever need to know. And I also have a test your text slang knowledge mini quiz. that you may take and see how you fare out with the new language that we are exposed to all the time. So I hope you enjoyed the little session on abbreviations and acronyms. Just please, if you're going to use them responsibly, use them effectively, and make sure you're using them in the correct situations.